Well, welcome everybody. I'm Stewart Carroll. I'm the president of Beck Technology. Thank you for coming to our workshop this morning. Hopefully we're going to have some fun. I'm going to make a few comments just to sort of frame this. So as an industry, none of this should be a surprise to anybody. We have, traditional processes, design, bid, build, CM at risk, et cetera. I contend that as an industry, we want to get involved earlier and earlier, provide more value to our customers through negotiated work. The way that we typically get involved is through pre-construction, helping the owner set a budget. And the earlier we get involved, typically the less data you have in order to establish that budget, right? It can be a one-line diagram, it can be a narrative, it can be, hey, I want to know how much an office building is going to cost at the end of a phone call. As we move from estimate to estimate, we get more information, we add more detail, we get more certainty as to what really it is in the architect's mind and the owner's pocket that we're ultimately going to build. But it's not really until weeks, months, sometimes years later that we actually get a GMP, a set of plans that we can build on. And even then, sometimes there's major changes in the field, but we really don't know what it ultimately costs until the project is done more often than not. Again, no surprise, I'm sure, to everybody in this room. We create volumes and volumes of data throughout those processes, and historically, we've never really captured it. If you have captured it, more often than not, it's an extra step. It requires somebody or a group of people to go off after a deliverable is created, format it, and put it into some tool for historical cost purposes. The reality is, while that's a great idea, nobody's got enough time, so more often than not, it sort of dies on the vine. Does that sound familiar? I see lots of head nodding. All right, so we also hear in our industry, challenges. We hear things like, in fact, I was on LinkedIn last week, I'm sure a lot of people are seeing this. There's a lot of pre-construction staff that are moving from company to company. And when an individual, 10, 15, 20, you pick your years of experience, gets up and moves from one company to another company, with that process, we lose a lot of ability. We lose a lot of knowledge, experience that goes with that individual. We don't really have what I would consider corporate wisdom. We have individual wisdom, individual knowledge, and that moves around with whoever has had that experience in their mind. We also are actively trying to attract new people to come into pre-construction teams. These young guys and girls coming out of great schools, oftentimes with hundreds of thousands of college debt. And as an industry, first thing we give them is a set of plans, a set of digital crayons, and we ask them to do something like you would do in an elementary school, sketch over the top of this drawing, please. It's not particularly attractive, as one of the presenters made a comment a couple years ago. Pre-con's not sexy. It's not. But as a going forward, I think we have enormous opportunities to make pre-construction better than what it is today. So you're going to hear, I'm sure, throughout today and the rest of this conference, a couple of themes, and I just want to frame those. I promise this is not a shameless plug for us. This is what I perceive as happening in the industry. We've gone from using tools for specific tasks. So I mentioned, digital crayons. We have tools for 2D. Over the last 3, 4, 5 years, we've obviously heard and seen BIM, and there's tools for extracting quantities from models. We do conceptual estimating. We use tools for conceptual estimating. We do detail estimating. We use tools for detail estimating. We're not short of tools. In fact, the biggest challenge with tools is that they create pockets of data, but those pieces of data never work together in an ecosystem. So one of the things that you're going to hear, I'm sure, through the presenters and elsewhere in the conference is this notion of platforms. And you're going to see the idea of a platform where a user can perform a specific task. They can enter data in one place for one activity, And when they go to another activity, that data flows seamlessly so that you don't have to re-enter it or copy and paste it or even manually re-enter it. The second thing you're going to hear is this word data. And as the first person at the conference to speak, I'd love to hear if anybody has heard of the data pyramid. Has anybody heard of the data pyramid? By the end of the conference, I would be shocked if you hadn't heard it at least 4 or 5 times. So the data pyramid is 4 layers of data. At the bottom, we have raw data. Raw data is numbers, symbols, text. Really meaningless. The second layer that you'll hear people talk about is information. Information is where you group raw data to describe something. So in our world, typically, a good piece of information is a line item. Has a description, a unit of measure, a quantity, a unit price, and a cost. The third layer is knowledge. So it's a combination of pieces of information that describe, say, a project. It was a 50,000 square foot office project built with concrete with water-cooled air conditioning. And then the final layer, where everybody really wants to get to, and in my mind, where our industry starts to change, is wisdom. And wisdom is where we can actually look at knowledge across multiple projects, look for patterns, and use it as a way of making informed decisions. So you're going to start to hear a lot about data. For the purposes of what we're going to talk about this morning, all of that is data. If we can capture it when that senior estimator leaves, yes, it's a shame. Yes, their personal experiences have gone, but we have that data so that that new pre-construction team member can come in and start to benchmark their project against other projects that your company has done. Instead of starting a project with nothing, we at least have the history of similar projects. Obviously, not all projects, even if they're office and if they're concrete and if they're 200,000 square feet, are the same. But you'll have the ability to dissect and get into elements that you can use for benchmarking, say, the concrete frame or the mechanical system or the elevators. I see this as being a really exciting future. We use tools today in our daily lives on our phones. I'm sure I'm not the only one that logs onto Amazon, and Amazon gives us suggestions based on our data, our buying history. I wish it wasn't my wife's handbags, but I see that for our industry. We build the same types of projects. Why can't computers help us instead of us having to go search for data? Computers are going to start to provide us our history at our fingertips, and it's going to make suggestions, just like on Amazon. Here's the unit prices, the max, the min, the median. You choose which you use. Alternates. Instead of coming up with the same 50, 60 alternates time and time again, the computer is going to start to present those to us as options. So I get excited about where we are, but more excited about where we're going. So without further ado, I'm going to hand it over to our first presenter, who's going to talk a little bit about what they're doing. Greg O'Brien is one of our pre-construction leads at the Beck Tech's sister company, the Beck Group. And Greg's going to talk a lot about what they're doing, what they see, and I hope what an exciting future we have at large. So without further ado, Greg.
Thanks, Stewart. So that was really a great introduction to where I'd like to kick off is around cost history and what is it, first of all. I'll give some examples of how we at Beck are using cost history, and then just share some lessons learned around cost history that we've encountered. I'm going to start with this poll. How does your company handle cost history? And there's a few different options here. I think there's information on your tables about how to do the polls. So if you haven't already taken a look at that, take a look, and I'll give a few seconds for people to do that and answer. But the main options that I have here in mind are using commercially available cost data, which a company might choose to do that, or looking through old files, kind of ad hoc analysis where there's not really a system in place, or using internal spreadsheets or experience. Kind of what Stewart mentioned too about having that experience, that institutional knowledge as a method. There could be other things like off-the-shelf software. or even kind of custom-built software. So take a moment to answer that if you haven't already. And really, this is kind of what I expected that we might have amongst this group because of my own experience as well, is that looking through old files is a very common way to do it, as Stewart alluded to. For some context about Beck and about our company, just as we look a little bit more about how we use cost history, is we are a construction and architecture firm, merged with an architecture firm about 20 years ago. And really in the last year and a half, we've really doubled down on this integrated model, this integrated mindset, and how we can deliver value to customers. One of the key ways that we're doing that is through cost certainty and cost stability, kind of starting very early in the process and going throughout to the end. So that's something that really requires for us to have a really solid base of cost history to be able to actually do that. I'll share before I go on any further about cost history, just kind of how I frame what cost history really is. I see it as the cost data and the closely related non-cost information, I'll get into that a little bit later, which describes some aspect of a construction project. I think of it as, and Stewart captured this very well, the things we do as pre-construction professionals, but captured in some sort of system. So here's some examples of what that could look like. It could be a database, something that's pretty on the more sophisticated end. It could be spreadsheets, which of course we all know and love in pre-construction and is a very good tool for organizing information. Or it could be that institutional knowledge in the heads of our estimators. But everyone, to some degree, I would propose, captures cost history in some way or another. Each company will answer the question of how to approach cost history in different ways, depending on a few factors. I think of them as the company factors and the purpose factors of what someone's trying to do. So each company is, in fact, different, and each company will answer these questions differently. So for one aspect is, what type of projects are you doing? Are they all very similar, or are they all very diverse? And if they're all very similar, you'll of course accumulate information much more quickly. If they're diverse, it takes a bit more time and to get a group of similar projects, similar components. Self-perform, if someone is doing self-perform concrete, you're probably more concerned with the nuts and bolts detail of cost history, or the productivity, or the hours spent. Things like that are probably more of a concern, whereas if someone is not doing self-perform, or at least not in that area, you probably fly at a little bit higher level. The existing data ecosystem, so this just kind of means how good is the data already, and what sort of data practices and infrastructure is available at a company. That'll kind of change how each company answers the question of how to tackle cost history to some degree or another. And then as far as purpose, granularity, what you want to try and capture or target, whether that's whole jobs, that more detailed level analysis, or even really the nuts and bolts of the 2x4, the block of CMU. You could go very granular, or you could kind of stay at a higher level, or something in between. Now, non-cost information is necessary to provide some context, and what I mean by that is the things that are not dollars or not embedded in line items, but which are really essential to understanding the context of what this means. So most basics of which is, how many square foot is this building? What type of building is this? When was it built? Where was it built? So those types of things are really critical to understanding what these costs mean, and how to give them context and further analyze. And then there's of course the debate of do we just capture estimates, or do we just capture completed projects, or do we want both? Because they provide a little bit different flavor of information, and different companies may decide that different ones are priorities. Now, where cost history fits in the data lifecycle, really it kind of has a place, I would say, throughout, but just to try and bracket it a little bit, it's the result of past experience. So this is the cost information that we receive through the bidding process, through the actual projects and the subcontracts, through the billings. and through market information that may not be directly tied to a project, may just be information that's available in the market. This could also be metrics, so cost per square foot, cost per car. So there's plenty of things in our experience that help inform and give us our cost history. Now, what is cost history used for? Current and future estimating activities. So the most common of which, and Stewart mentioned this earlier, and I'm sure you all have heard of these types, at least in some way, is benchmarking, comparing a group of similar things to some other thing, and trending, comparing one project over time, and that could be the total project cost, that could be some detailed component or metric where you want to really track on that project, that metric, or those set of metrics. So those are the most common two. There are other analyses that you can do, but these are some of the most common that you'd probably want to do with cost history. As an example of what a benchmark might look like, if we said we've got 5 office buildings, and made up numbers, of course, if you wanted to build a 6th that is, call it similar to these projects, what would you expect it to be? Probably somewhere around $6 a square foot, plus or minus a couple dollars. On the flip side, you could also use benchmarking to say, if I wanted to build a project which is $4 a square foot, how do I need to approach it? And so in this same example of projects, you might say, the 3 on the left are useful to looking to what we want to do, and the 2 on the right are useful to look and see what do we not want to do. So you can kind of use benchmarking in either way, really. As an example, as we start looking at some of how we've implemented cost history, this is a snapshot of some of our benchmarking internally, and you can see some of the basics we have is cost per square foot. We've got the context of, what was the duration of this project, what was the location of it. You could put any number of things to pair with this, or any graphics to pair with this that you might want. Could be some type of benchmarking analysis. And similar at the drill down level, so if we wanted to look at how do the uniformat categories break down once we actually dive into those projects and look a little bit more, we might want to look and see, okay, for those 5 projects, let's look and see what the superstructure cost for those. Let's look at the interiors. And in this kind of example set, you'll see we've got some things that are really tightly grouped, which gives us a high degree of confidence that that's probably a good range, or some things that are very widely grouped or widely distributed, rather. And that tells us that we need to do some more digging and investigating to figure out which one is appropriate for our project. This is an example of project trending, or really this is more a version comparison. You could have some different twists on this with trending, where you actually implement a time scale or a time value, and you look at multiple milestones kind of throughout. And that would be a different way to approach it, but really on trending, you're looking, or version comparison, you're looking at one project over multiple iterations, and how does it track and trend. This one in particular focuses on the uniformat level 2 categories and how it compares between 2 versions as an example. Now, when do we capture cost history? Like I mentioned before, it's really important for us as a company to look from that earliest stage of conceptual estimating all the way through the end, to have that stability and certainty. So that's informing what's important for us. And I would say it's really possible and helpful to look at projects along all of those milestones to see how things change. Each one can be viewed as a different flavor on the same project, or even as different projects to help kind of inform the data pool. And of course, if you're doing trending, you may want to insert some progress snapshots in here, even to get a little bit more, some more touch points. To give a little history, for those who may be looking to implement some sort of cost history, I'll share what it was for us. And again, like has been a theme in this, each company may approach this a little bit differently. But the way that we approached cost history is we really looked at, in 2019, what's our vision? And let's do kind of a mock-up. We call it a duct tape and baling wire version. Something just good enough to show what we want to do and get some initial buy-in. 2020 for us was really fleshing this out a bit more, integrating with our information technology systems, looking at how we can use the tools that I'll mention to support this kind of process. And then 2021, this year, has been really nuts and bolts, fine-tuning that implementation piece. So I share this to say that it can be, depending on how you approach it, a little bit of a process, or it can be much shorter depending on your approach. And I think that what Beck Tech has here with Estimator is really an opportunity to help streamline a lot of that so that it's able to capture that information just as you go. It's part of what you do and capture it as you go. One of the realities that I'll share, and this is an image that'll look very familiar to all of us, is just because we're building something doesn't mean that the need isn't still there, that we have to provide some value along the way. So for us, that's been our experience of even though we're in the process of building, of growing this and developing and implementing this kind of final cost history piece, last year in particular, and even into this year, we've had the need to use the in-progress work to still provide some value. So I'll just say that there's definitely some need if you're looking to implement or grow your cost history to provide that value, of course, along the way. Some other lessons that I'll share is what's really been key for us is a combination of people and process and technology. So for people, that's the people doing the work, both pre-construction people and some more technical folks as well who can help on that side. For the process, really, for cost history, it's kind of table stakes to have a good process in place so that whenever you grab, say 10 different projects and you want to perform the same kind of analysis across all 10, that it actually makes sense and that they all kind of adhere to a similar standard, a similar process. And then technology, like we've been talking about, having some tools to make our lives easier so that it's maybe not that extra step or that extra work is minimized to the bare minimum so that it's not an extra step, an extra chore after that deliverable goes in. So some tools that I've already mentioned to help get the data right, having centralized information. So that's estimate data. DESTINI Estimator is the one that we use, but there are you can look and see how you want to approach that. Project accounting systems. Usually this is already centralized, so usually this is ready and available in some way. Maybe not exactly how we expect to use it, but at least a good start. Project data. So this is that non-cost information, and where does that live? So depending on what a company chooses to do with non-cost information, this could be embedded in the estimate, or if it's a little bit more extensive, maybe there's some company solution to where do we keep information about projects more globally that maybe integrates more than just estimating and pre-construction's concerns, but maybe there's some other aspects that are captured in some central location. Definitely something that is probably an IT helping point on that one. As we all know, time and location adjustments are key to looking at any historical information and analyzing it for present and future needs. And then there could be any number of other things that you might want to bring in and group with this information. As far as tools and practices, templates are the number one, I'd say, and then any quality control checks, but anything that can help as you're doing your work to get the information in right the first time, to not have that duplicate entry, to not have that information that maybe is close but not quite what you wanted. Anything like that can help that data entry process be more accurate the first time it goes in is really, really key. And then just avoiding that multiple entry. So if you ask the pre-construction person to answer the same question, and then maybe there's someone who helps with buyout, they answer the question, and then someone at the end of project answers a question, you have the potential for that same question to be 3 different answers, which maybe really should be the same answer. Consistency and execution is another key for success in cost history. So that's standardized inputs, that's consistent WBS coding. Maybe we use uniformat in all of our estimates, so we make sure that that's a coding standard that we adhere to. Maybe there's some sort of trade code or master format code that we adhere to on all of our estimates. That kind of standard, having that be there and in place for all the projects that you want to analyze really makes it possible to have good analysis on the back end. And any other standard practices and procedures that a company wants to implement, making sure that those are consistent and reliable so that when you grab those 10, 20, 30 projects, that it means what you want it to mean when you start doing that analysis. And then standardized reporting. This really gets to, number one, on cost history, making your life easier. so that you're not trying to come up with something custom every time. But also, if it's similar every time, you start to build that trust and people understand, okay, this is what that calculation means. This is how we get from that contract value that I remember 5 years ago in another city to this current number that I'm seeing on the screen. And to the extent that there's any corporate standards around how that's handled, maybe alignment with that helps build that confidence even more. And final thought that I'll leave you all with around cost history and implementing or improving upon a cost history solution is really just to clarify your goals, what you want to do, what makes sense for your company. Start with low-hanging fruit and deliver that value along the way so that you can build momentum with cost history. Maintain the long-term vision, so there will be plans that you'll want to implement that aren't day one plans, but maybe are future plans, and then plan for that expansion. So I think that should hopefully give a good principle and framework to anyone who's looking to begin or grow their cost history strategies.
All right, again, hopefully everybody's having fun. Our next speaker is Andy Leak with PARIC out of St. Louis, Missouri. We've known Andy quite a long while. Hopefully you're going to have fun with Andy's presentation and Andy's presentation style. Andy?
I know I got one of these fancy polls in here. It says, how can historical and contextual data inform your process? So for those of you that had the same vision test that I did earlier, so it's both can have an impact. Historical data is more helpful than contextual data. Or the other way, contextual data is king, and pricing is too fluid these days anyway. Or are you kidding? COVID messed everything up, right? Or last but not least, one of the favorite center offices, I prefer to use my magic 8-ball because databases are hard. So I'll tell you, this is my first conference in almost 2 years. Am I the only one? How many other people, this is their first conference in a while? Yeah. I got some fancy new pants for this one. COVID's been helpful on my waistline. So I'm going to try and have a little fun. It's Monday. It's early. I'm going to talk about some estimating stuff that we've been doing at PARIC. Just a little about me, just so you have kind of some context of me. We're going to talk a lot about context in my presentation. My background is as an architect, so I apologize ahead. I will try not to do anything too designy, but we are going to talk a little bit about design, more in the context of how it informs the estimating pre-construction process, and more so how you're interacting with your teams and leveraging the technology that's kind of driving that. So I'm going to spend a little time talking about how you get better information to and from your design team, and how you can leverage that throughout that pre-construction process. So I guess some good fenders or some good bumpers to put on this conversation. Every project's a little different. And the type of estimate that you're going after, are you doing a hard bid or design build? Is it a self-performed job or not? I think that Greg touched on several aspects of this in his presentation. It's all that has an impact on what tools you use and when, what information you're going to use and when. And so with that, contextual information is really critical to what we're doing. The actionable insights aspects of this, there's data, but then there's more communication, how you're coordinating with your team, how you're working with them. And so if you can start to share some of the tools you're using with them, I think actionable insights kind of work in a bi-directional way. And then lastly, as Greg mentioned earlier, having everything in one place where everybody can access it, we're going to spend a little time talking about that. So highlighting this once more, so context is king. It's also highly dynamic. I promise I won't read every slide to you today. To me, as an architect growing up in that aspect of my career, understanding not only where the building was, but how we were going to go about building it, what made sense for the views and all that kind of stuff, but then who were we going to work with? What region of the country were we working in? What level of sophistication did the market have to support different workflows or different types of services? All that kind of stuff that has an impact on your price. And so as you get into the pre-construction process, a lot of different things come into play. And so I found this awesome little graphic about the St. Louis Wolves. Most of you are probably still too young to know that one, but nonetheless, it's the who, what, when, where, right? So I'm going to build a new office building, a new high-rise, a new multifamily or senior living type project. How, the who, what, when, where of that project is going to make a big impact on the approach we take, and how we're going to ultimately construct it, buy it out, and so on. So, kind of want to back off of this for just a second, but there's estimating software, which I love talking about estimating software, love talking about scheduling software, it's all great stuff. But at the end of the day, there's a bunch of other technology that we use. So, drones and a lot of other reality capture information help us bring that context into light. So, it's not just about the estimating piece itself, it's not just about the database of historical cost data, it's what other contextual information are we going to get into. And so, just by a quick show of hands, everybody in here is probably an Excel expert, right? Anybody in here not know Excel? All right, just want to make sure I was in good company. How many of you know Power BI? That's better than I thought. That's awesome. So they're saying 45 is the new 35, so I feel a lot better about my waistline. Power BI is like the new Excel, right? If you don't have somebody in your team that's playing with Power BI, getting curious about how they can use that to start looking at all this magnificent data we've started to develop and store, you're missing a huge opportunity there, because they're going to start to look at that data in different ways. I mean, I have some guys on our team that are doing things, and they'll just show up on a Tuesday morning and say, hey, check this out. I was playing with some data and started to see some other patterns, things I wasn't even thinking about. And the more we start to focus in on that type of innovation and creativity, the more we're getting out of the data that we're storing. It also is starting to drive some unexpected behaviors. How we structure data, the last question we were going through is how do you get more value out of the information, essentially? Well, if it's not standardized, you're never going to be able to round trip that data. And so if you start off in a project early and you put the estimate together a certain way, you put in a location breakdown structure and all that, and then it goes through that construction process where they make sausage out of your estimate, it's hard to unwind that at the end and really understand how much did my concrete really cost? How much did my MEPs really cost? And so some of this innovation work we've been doing around using analytics to drive how we study the numbers has started to inform the guys, you know what, if we just broke down the estimate a little differently, if we just stayed on top of our ops team to make sure that they tracked these numbers all the way through, that makes that a heck of a lot easier on the back end to go, did we do good on that or not? If it's self-performed, we generally have a much better feel, but if it's not, it gets a little fuzzier. So let's talk a little bit about contextual data again. So drones, I'm sure a lot of you have drones in your organization one way or the other. How many of you actually use drones in the early pre-construction process? Probably a few, but not all, right? This information is loaded with valuable data points. So you can measure it, you can do cut fill analysis, you can just get context to the site. Where is it in the world? How am I going to service it? How am I going to do deliveries? If you start to bring in the owners and the rest of the client team, have them inform you how you're going to build their project, right? So you're doing a senior living project on a large campus, for example. How are they going to get deliveries in? Where's their staff going to park? How are you going to be putting them in a funky position throughout their construction process or your construction process? If they start to tell you you have to change your build plan because of the way they want to operate their campus, cost might go up, schedule might get elongated. All those things start to matter. So this data is great for the pre-con team, but it's also great for your client. It brings them along for the ride. Similar with laser scanning. So there's all kinds of projects in this world. Some are brand new, fresh construction on a beautiful, green, pristine site with perfect soil conditions. And then there's everything that we build, which is, it can be new construction, but it's never a perfect site. It's always a brownfield with all kinds of hidden gems, poor soils, some buried cars sometimes. I mean, you never know what you're going to get there. All those things matter. If it's an existing structure and you're going to go in and renovate it, in the St. Louis market, Kansas City market, we have a lot of old stock that's being converted into like loft apartments and studios. Having scan data from that early aspect of that project to share not only with the pre-con team, but the design team, and kind of partner up early. You're not making 55 different site visits, which is super helpful, but you can measure it. You can look at the photos. You can track that for historical tax credits and be a partner to your development team, right? It's not just about creating a model. In fact, to me, laser scanning is almost entirely not about building a model. It's about really investigating the project so that your team knows what they're getting themselves into, so that your subs know what they're getting themselves into. I mean, it's gotten to a point where this was kind of a luxury 10 years ago. Today, it's kind of becoming table stakes. If you're really going to work on a large 14 or 20 or 30-story building, go scan the thing. Save yourself having to huff up those steps on a building that's no longer got an operating elevator or ever had an elevator. Helmet cams. These are awesome, by the way. They look so stylish. I love wearing mine. I wear it at home. My wife thinks it's so cool. She doesn't. So, passive data collection. So, drones are great because you can throw them up in the sky, they'll scan 50 acres in 15 minutes or something, and you got data that you can measure. You throw it in ag tech or something like that, and you're getting, real earthwork information. The laser scanners are awesome, but time consuming, right? Like, you really got to commit to having that work done, and you got to convince your owner that they need that information early in the project. Always fun to try and do. This is as easy as it gets. Like, you literally can walk and chew bubble gum. This is your technology, right? It's a very simplistic scan, but it's tons of photos. It's great documentation, again. This can help set baselines early in the project. It can help you understand what's going on in each space, whether that's a hotel room or mechanical space or whatever. And I am driving towards something here, but with all this reality capture stuff, really what you're trying to do is just get more information available to the team so they can start digging in. So now let's dig in a little bit. So some of you probably seen this technology. This is TestFit.io. I'm not here to sell any software, but just because this is cool. So Clifton and his team have built a really, really awesome little product here where, as an architect back in my day, I could spend hours sketching on a site plan, figuring out the setbacks, understanding what amount of parking I needed, how much green space I needed, how much building could actually fit in that program on that site, and then I'd have to come up with 6 other options, right? Versus this thing, you can literally sketch on the site, and within 10 seconds, 20 seconds, you've got a complete design. You take that information, you do 6 of them in half an hour and get some coffee, and you kick out this little Excel file at the bottom, or you build an API, or you do whatever magic you want to do to connect them up. Now you're pricing at a conceptual level 6 options over coffee with your client. Like, that's a totally different way of doing it. Here, I would like to have a hotel, sir. We'll see you in 2 weeks. Or, you'd like to do a hotel? Well, let's go grab lunch, and we'll figure out a couple of performas for you, and we can get this project off center. I mean, it took me 20 minutes to learn how to use this software at a high level. It took me 4 hours to learn it, good enough, where I can forget it and come back and relearn it again over and over and over. It's not a tool that I use all the time. It's not a team that our team uses all the time. But when we do use it, it's short, it's in a quick spurt, and the client's able to see it in real time. Now, it ultimately turns into like HGTV. How many of you guys ever watched HGTV and they renovate an entire house in 30 minutes? I love that. My wife tells me, we're going to renovate our bathroom, our master bathroom. It's only 5 years old. And I said, well, when are we going to do that? She goes, well, I thought we could, do it maybe next weekend. Cool. I'm going to be sick that day, if that's okay with you. But I'll provide all the tools and the beer. So, I guess what I'm driving at here is it's the whole work smarter, not harder kind of thing. These tools are out there. How many people in here have ever used this tool or ever even heard of it? Okay, so that's like 4. And that was a very scientific measurement. Probably 4, right? If you haven't tried this tool, it's $500 a month. $500 a month for 5 seats. TestFit.io. So we take this tool, and with our great partners at Beck Tech, we round trip some of this data into their product, and we do a quick conceptual estimate, right? This is like a game changer. like, this is like drones, right? Like the first time I flew a drone and I got a whole site and it turned it into a 3D mesh and I was able to do site earthwork, I was like, holy shit, are you kidding me? Same thing with this. The first time I tried this and I showed it to somebody, I was like, you should just live and breathe this every day. It should be a part of what you do as a sales executive. It should be part of what you're doing as a pre-construction executive. All right, so I'm gonna move us forward. I get really excited about these kind of tools. So we talked a little bit about Power BI. So as Greg was saying earlier, so you've gone through all this energy to put together an estimate, and now you want to understand where the industry's at, or you're at the end of the project and you want to understand how you perform on the job, or you're sitting in front of a client, sketching on TestFit.io, and they go, well, what do you think it's going to cost for me to build my 6-story hotel building? Because we've had scope creep, because I said it was 3 stories earlier. Now we're at 6 stories, and now they want a parking structure, and they want to build it in the middle of winter, of course, because why not? So pulling up a dashboard like this where you could say, well, as an industry professional, we started storing our data, and we're not 2 guys in a truck anymore. So what do we think it's going to cost, right? So there's all these cost indices out there that you can look at. But then what about your indices? For us, what are PARIC's indices? What do we think it's going to cost to pour concrete? What do we think it's going to cost to frame the building? This is sophistication at a somewhat simplistic level. I mean, really, you're just taking your data and making it pretty, but you're also making it interactive. You're making the process of educating your client or working with your pre-con team more interactive. I'm a highly visual person. It's in my DNA because my background, but not everybody looks at data the same way. The first time I looked at a trend line, I was like, oh, cool, Frank Gehry. But ultimately, that data is driving you towards a decision-making process, right? So why am I making this decision to buy this type of material or installing it at this time of year or use this particular sub or scope it out where I'm merging multiple things together? Why did I do that? There's a whole slew of decision-making things that come along with that process where that context is driving you in a direction. So having a database is great. Having a way to share that database with your team in real time and use it as a tool. This is not a presentation tool. And that's one of the things, I harp on this a little bit in our office is we have all this great technology, but we don't always use it to drive a meeting. It's like the exclamation mark at the end. Like, oh, look at this cool dashboard we built. Dashboards are tools. They are absolutely not presentation tools. They are working tools. Now, they look cool up here, but if you're in a meeting with a client, they don't want to see your Power BI dashboard at the end as kind of like the exclamation mark that, hey, I was here and I showed up. What's the value of this dashboard? I want to change the levels of the building. I want to change the footprint of the building. I want to change the parking. I want to change the level of quality or finish. I want to change my schedule. I want to be able to drag and drop a couple bars back and forth and have them see, when I move this, this popped out. When I move this up, this came in. Those types of changes, and they can start to see that causality and the cause effect going on. Now they're starting to understand why it happened. Otherwise, it's a number in the bottom right corner, as our friends at the table were talking about, that it's just a number. And they don't know how you got to that number. And it takes either years of trust or a whole lot of pages of an estimate, which to me is not the way to go. So taking this information and thinking about the life cycle of the project. So if you're doing a self-perform project, you're obviously going to go to a much greater level of detail in your estimate to understand, if I'm bidding everything out at a high level, I just want the number. Versus when you're actually going to take this into a self-perform routine, you're tracking every nut and bolt. You want to know everything about that project. You want to know your productivity rates and things like that. Setting up that estimate at the beginning so that you can track that all the way through allows you to actually see that data, which is great. But I'll back off this point just for a second. That's great for the people that want to do historical cost analysis. For the people that are running the self-perform teams, you have to find a way to make them care, because they are the ones that have to fill this information out. They have to do their timesheets. They actually have to track the work in place on a daily or weekly basis. The cadence of the updates here drives the productivity rates. So it doesn't do them any good to understand their productivity rate at the end of the job. They need to know, like, daily, at a minimum weekly, so they can adjust their teams. Do we need more people? Is weather impacting us? Can we not get materials fast enough? All the things that come into a construction life cycle. If they understand that in real time, now they're going to be more enticed to help you get this data. Because without them, there is no you, is what I've learned anyway. So let's round trip this back to the teams. So as you're going through the design process and you're trying to connect the dots of, we understand the site conditions, we understand the way that we're going to contract this job, we understand how we're going to buy it out. Now we got to get into all the coordination aspects of a project and start to pull the team together. So I said earlier, you've got scan data. How do you get it to the teams? There's nothing better than putting it on a hard drive and having to give it with a courier, or these days, I don't even know how you do it, pigeon carriers or whatever, so that you actually get the data to them. So they need a 2 terabyte drive to get your scan data. It just doesn't make any sense. So what if you can connect the data to your estimate and the model and hand it off to them? So a way that we've approached this, and everybody does a little bit different, is I can give it to you on a hard drive. I can put it on a Dropbox account or Link or OneDrive or whatever. Or I can just put it in a PM tool, our single source of truth, and let you access it in real time. So the way we've approached this is we put our estimates, we put our schedule, we put all the reality capture data, all the drawings, all the models, everything. And we don't do this when we start construction. We do this when we start pre-construction, all the way at the beginning. So I don't know if you guys remember watching the bell curve for BIM, like everything's got to be front loaded and you put everything here, and then it kind of ski slopes down throughout the duration of the project. In the design world, that was like a big change. For pre-con, it feels like a bigger change. I don't know why. But getting everybody to structure that estimate early on, but more so getting the rest of this information and using it, is a bigger struggle, it seems. So this has been a way that we've used this technology to say, okay, here's everything we know about this project right now, and you have unfettered access to it. You don't have to go to the building 55 times. You don't have to walk up and down a building that doesn't have stairs. You don't have to go and stand on a hilltop and try and guess the undulation on the site. You don't have to wait for a surveyor to come out and give you all the topographic information. We'll go do it for you. Our pre-con services are very focused on understanding the constraints of the project up front, providing that context to the project team up front, becoming partners with our designers up front, and giving them all the data that we have, because I can't do anything with this data by myself. I need them. So for us, we're looking at all the data now. So it's not just the estimate data, it's not just the schedule data, it's all the contextual data, and it's all is in close to real time as we can get it to you. So that way we're all making the same decisions together, and we know how we got there. And so with that, I'll kind of wrap up here with just one last slide, which is, I think Stewart mentioned earlier around having this life cycle approach to data. So if you're beginning with the end in mind, the beginning is all the way in that early pre-con phase, and it's all the way through and after construction. So having that conversation early with your project team that this is the way that you're going to approach your project, this is the level of data you're going to have, allows them to start to think a little bit differently about when are they going to make decisions? Who needs to be a part of that decision-making process? And ultimately, when you round trip the data, you have more context to say, how did I get to this number? This is how. It wasn't just an off occurrence. It was a very specific, thought out scenario. And when we finish that project up, we can say, did we do what we thought we were going to do? And we thought it was going to be $50 a square foot, and it was $50 a square foot? Or did we think it was going to be $50 a square foot, and we ended up at 110, and we didn't make any money? Because if we're not making any money, we're not going to get to do it again. And so to me, that's never the goal. Like, it's all about trying to figure out the best way to build that mousetrap and actually make some money. Of course, COVID's going to make all that more difficult, but we're going to get there, I promise. So with that, I think I'm going to hand it off to Stewart. Thank you guys for entertaining me.
All right, we have one more speaker, definitely last, but by no means least. We have Jacob Keith with Layton. Known Jacob for, 15 years, Jacob? 10 to 15 years, a long, long time. I'm excited about Jacob's presentation, so without further ado, let's hand it over to Jacob. Thank you.
So we've got a poll already up here, and I hope you'll take a look at this. Let's talk about it first, though. What is important to you in regards to your bid tabulation process or your software, what's important to you besides speed and accuracy? Kind of interesting, okay. All of the above seems like a pretty popular answer. We all want it to do all of that. Quick question for all of you. Who here is general contractor in pre-construction and you do bid tabulation, bid analysis on a regular basis by raise of hands? Okay, good, thank you. Just wanted to make sure I knew my audience. And who's still using Excel? All of us. Okay, most of us. I've been saying for years now, and Stewart knows it, I've been saying for years, the industry needs to help us pre-con people get out of Excel. And so this is good. I'm a pre-con guy, I'm not a tech guy, I'm not Andy. I'm not that cool, but you know, it's good today. I've learned some new things. I've learned test fit IO, I'm gonna do that. And I've been talking to Greg about his historical data, it's been good. I hope today you come away with some little nugget of something that you can use in your process. Some of this you'll see, and I think you'll look at and you'll hear about today, and it'll be like, yeah, I already do that. That's a no-brainer. But some of this, hopefully, there's something new here that you aren't doing that you can take away today. Okay. This is what I want. This is what's important to me in my bid tabulation process, and I think maybe some of you will share my opinion. But number one, the ability to import my estimate data and WBS data into my bid tabulation. Now you'll look, this looks very Excel-like, and I apologize in advance. Every slide is Excel, so bear with me. Hopefully something better is coming, but in any case, this is importing data into Excel bid tabulation, okay? I use Estimator, our company uses DESTINI Estimator like many of you. And you know, we've got a way to do that. So very important to us. And you don't have visibility or the ability to really analyze a bid without that, do you? The other thing that's important, I think, the second item is having this database of content, if you will. Not only do we want the estimate data, but we need a database, as many of you all know and use probably, of trade-specific requirements. You know, if I'm doing demolition, these are the things that the demolition contractor always needs to pick up or include in his bid. It may not be quantified in the form of an estimate, but these are the things he's got to do every single time. Or likewise, and I know this is hard to read, so imagine with me. Likewise, project-specific requirements or a database of, hey, these are the things that team of estimators, you've got to be sure that you're picking up and checking in every bid, every time, in every trade. Okay, so wouldn't that be nice to have, we've got these databases, we've got to be able to pull it together. And so this is really important to me, again, having this ability to grab the estimate data, the trade-specific checklists, your project requirement data, your checklists or data, that, and pull it all together and magically turn it into a nice combined bid tabulation sheet by trade, all set up for you, done. So you don't have to spend a day or two setting that up. You know, some of you probably are still doing that, I don't know, but hopefully not. It's a big waste of time. So next important part is analyzing bids. Now we've got another set of data we've got to pull in somehow, and that's the bid responses. And being able to take bid form breakdown and data from our subcontractors and import that into our bid analysis. Is there a way to do that? And that's something that's important to us right now. You know, our other process there is a little more automated thanks to some help from some really smart people in the room here, but this process is really clunky. And you know, there's software out there that does it. It's hard to find one platform that does everything you want. And so right now we're just kind of doing old school, entering in the responses from their subs. But in any case, you've got to incorporate these responses. Now, what's hard to see here is this next topic, is cost categories. This is really near and dear to my heart, as some of you may know. And how many times have you been asked the question, how much money do you have in the job? Just tell me right now, quickly. Just tell me. Well, I don't, yeah, it's enough. It's good enough. We got plenty, trust me. Have you ever had this conversation? Well, just tell me how much you got in there. Well, I don't know. So with the cost categories, it's kind of helped solve that problem, because 20 years ago I was having this problem. If you can quickly say, well, what we'll do is, and it's hard to see from where you're sitting, but for each subcontractor number or line item, we're going to put a little letter or a designation next to each one and say, okay, this is a subcontractor number, or no, this item, it's clearly shown in the plans and specs, but the sub didn't pick it up. So we've got to plug money for it. Or, you know what, this subcontractor is a little more risky, presents more risk to the job. We've got to put a little contingency here. I'm going to put some contingency on this one. And the cases, the end cases for this cost categorization are endless. There's so many things you can use them for. For example, IGMP versus FGMP. How many times have you, or you're doing multiple iterations of a GMP that should have only been done once, but you end up doing it 3 times. Anyone ever been there? Okay, so you've got to be able to track maybe the changes, or track the cost escalation that's happened. Has anyone been dealing with cost escalation? So it's a big problem. If we want to be able to track, also maybe value engineering, maybe in one round of the preliminary GMP you've gone through a round of VE. And you need to be able to track that with the final GMP that you've done. And we want to be able to track how much accepted VE got built into the GMP from beginning point to end point. So using those categories, we can tag every single little number or line item in each bid tab and track all of this. And present it in summary format here. And again, you'll have to kind of imagine it, because hopefully you get the slides at the end of the conference here and you can look at it in greater detail. But across this column, you see these colored columns. And those are the different cost categories that report back to your summary sheet, so you know instantly how much money you've got in the job. As soon as you put the money in the bid tab and tag it, you know. Maybe one of the categories is extra money, extra profit. Nobody does that, right? We're just going to put it and bury it in the bid tabs. I don't know. Hopefully no owners here, right? Just kidding. Everything is very transparent. In fact, we have a lot of clients where all of this is extremely transparent, and they know what every letter means, and they love it, because they can have extreme visibility on what every single number means. It's very powerful. And so at the very bottom, for somebody, like in my case, if I'm going to review someone else's work, I have to know, I'm asking that question, how much money do you have in the job? And I can tell right there by looking at the summary sheet at the bottom, I have little percentages at the bottom of each column. Well, we've got, $1 million of whatever. Well, that represents 2% of the total project cost. Okay, good. Got a feel for that now. Also having a summary sheet, and many of you I'm sure already do this, but this is critical to me, is having a summary sheet that really analyzes the data and reports it back in the way we need it. Having that second bidder analysis that manages risk, or wanting just to know, hey, we invited 1,400 subcontractors. That sounds like a lot, but really when you got a big job and a lot of trades, it's not. And how many really turned out to bid? Having that data right there handy is really, really useful, as many of you know. Another one, how did it vary from our estimate? Having that variance column, what's the GMP or the bids coming in compared to our original estimate or our previous estimate is really, really important. But again, having this data all managed where it's flowing into a central bid tabulation tool is critical. Okay, another one, a feature here, this is a feature that's really important to us, is having the ability to take all of these cost categories that we've built into our bid tabs and report them quickly. In other words, you have to produce an exhibit, for instance, with all of the allowances, the owner allowances that you've built into the job. Stuff that the architect didn't provide any design for. Now we've got to, we're just going to create an allowance to handle it, right? And we need to list those allowances as a contract exhibit. And having that ability to go through and look up all that data in all of the bid tabs instantaneously, collate it into a report and just hit print. Just in a few clicks, we know. We actually have that set up in ours. We've kind of done a little work. I have some tech guys in my group that have done that for me. And so it's really handy where, again, I can quickly not only just tell my manager, whomever, here's how much money we have in the job, but we can say, here's a complete report of all of it, where to find it, what the line items are, what they're called, and how much it totals, all in one little report, not with more than about 3 clicks. So that's really handy, as you can imagine, for everything from accepted VE to escalation we've seen to risk money that we build into bid tabs. It can all be reported separately on separate reports. And then right now we're using the clunky version, but it works for us, is we use Microsoft Teams. And so if you're in Excel, if you put the Excel file on Teams, now everybody can use it. And that's our workaround to a collaborative tool that all of us can use in real time. Has anyone actually used Teams in an Excel scenario to let everybody use the file? Anyone by raising hands? Just give me an idea. Quite a few of you. That's awesome. Okay. It's a workaround, but it works. But that's what I want to just kind of share with you today. Those are my 8 takeaways, 8 important key attributes, I think, of a bid tabulation process. And just to sum up, bringing the estimate data into having scope checklists, automating the bid tab process where it's just easy, using bid forms from subs, and I would love a process where that was incorporated more seamlessly into the bid tabs, and using categories, a summary sheet that's powerful that actually really does analysis, and contract exhibits that can be produced in just a few clicks, and then a team collaboration tool.
All right, we are getting towards the end of the session. We're going to invite the panelists up, and then I am going to invite people to ask the panelists questions. I can forewarn you, if I don't get questions, I'm going to pick on people. I'm pretty evil, so if you put your head down, I'm going for you. So if Jacob, Andy, Greg could come up, we'll do a panel discussion.
How do you deal with gaps pertaining to scope of work? There's 2 sides to that. One is if you're a general contractor, for example, there's your internal scope of work that you're creating or your subcontractor scope of work. So which side of that, I guess, does that question pertain to? The internal side, I think it's all about creating systems of estimating as much as you can without micromanaging your estimators and your staff, right? Giving them the freedom to sort of create, because there is a bit of a creative process involved, right? And, whatever software or Excel format system you're working within, I think it's important to always have a correlation of where you got that scope of work from and what details / elevations / sections are associated with that scope of work. I think that's something that's often overlooked. As far as subcontractor gaps, personally, I think the most important part of estimating by far is picking up the phone and having conversations with your subcontractors. Becoming a unit rate memory guy is very overrated in my opinion. And when you discuss scope of work with your subs, you're gonna learn that your sub is an expert in his field, probably more so than you are as a general contractor, but they put less into their estimate than you did because you're dedicated to that estimate and they're cranking out 5, 10, maybe 15 a day or a week, right? So I think picking up the phone and having communication with your subs is vital. And as far as a process, I personally like to have you know, a leveling sheet, like what I believe you guys are going to propose as a bid day scenario, right? And you carry over your unit costs and you highlight it a certain color so you have a visual representation of what's missing from their scope of work, and you add to their price and you add to their scope as you go.
I think he said it all. There's a fourth chair right here if you want to come on up.
I might add one component on the internal estimate side from a cost history perspective is that one of the benefits you could utilize cost history for is to maybe look at it a different way. Maybe this is the opportunity for the uniformat and say, does that kind of sniff out against the other similar projects? And can we see anything obvious from the data? Does it tell us that maybe we've got a hole, maybe we've got a double up? And there could be some indicators there. So I would suggest that could be a bit of a QA, QC check. There's many examples in our life where there's that disclaimer, past performance does not guarantee future results, right? So I would say the best we can do is the information we have to date, the trends that we've seen in past times that are like this, what we're hearing from our partners, from our trade partners, and using that to help inform our decisions. So I'll say that it's never a blind decision of what is my recent information telling me. It always takes that human intuition, that knowledge. I'll say you can enhance that through different means, but having someone who's engaged with the subcontractor community, having that input is really key, and it's always to a degree still ultimately a prediction and a guess, and we're often close but not exactly right. So our objective, I think, is to get as close as possible.
You know, predicting the cost increases and what they're going to do has been a challenge, hasn't it? You know, we've just pointed to the only thing that comes to my mind is we've looked at lumber. Look what lumber's done. You know, it went from 500 a board foot up to 1,000 plus, and now it's back to 500 again. And you know, we just point at that data and say, well, we use that as a predictor for maybe what the other materials in the industry may be doing here in the future.
I think the only thing I could add to that is, you know, it comes back to having the discussion with your partners in the trade. So, you know, they know what's going on, they know what they can buy, they know when they can get it. I think keeping those conversations open, but you know, I think it's related to the question around the approach that you take. I think that the concept of just going off of your gut, or, you know, that's still human insight is going to ultimately drive the decision-making process. But getting people more comfortable with the data and helping them understand why to make the decision off that data. We were talking about this at our table a little bit earlier, is not everybody's comfortable with all the technology and how to use it to sell or articulate the value of that information. And so it's not that they can't use the technology to do their day-to-day, they just don't know how to use it to convince an owner or whomever. And so helping them better understand how to leverage the technology to articulate why the decision needs to be made is something that I think is still a gap. And it's going to take us letting go of kind of some of these past processes, not all of them, but some of them, so they can adopt the new ones and make that their day-to-day.
Connecting numerical and contextual information. So what I shared a bit was we use DESTINI Estimator for our cost piece. We also bring in our completed project information from our accounting system. And then we've kind of built up this third leg to that stool, which is project information. And this has been something as a company that we have different pieces in different parts of the company that we're interested in aspects of a project's information. So what we've done is really develop something, and this is some smart people beyond my technical expertise have helped with this, to put together kind of a centralized repository of that project information. And so we're able to then pull those three major pieces together and digest them and then send it to Power BI to really report out. So Power BI is doing less of the legwork, and we've got more of the legwork happening on some internal like IT systems that happen to connect them.
So Jacob, you know, you showed a ton of detail from a previous estimate. How do you avoid the sub just giving you $50,000?
Isn't that the question, isn't it? I mean, that's a challenge we all deal with. We were just talking to a couple of partners here at the table about that, and they've been successful in training their subcontractors to respond a certain way. You know, when I was working with Greg at Beck, that was always a challenge for us. We had Greg Brock, who always required the MEP contractors to break down their information in a certain way, and he was insistent on that. And that's what we're trying to do, is just require that. That breakdown of that cost data is so important, and it tells a lot of information, doesn't it?
Tell them it's to their benefit.
What is their benefit?
Well, they always want feedback of why they did or didn't get a job, or why they didn't get a job, obviously. So tell them I can't give you good feedback. I can't tell you where you were high or low unless you give me a breakdown.
It's a great point.
It's imperative on us to provide that bid form, that breakdown that we want, of course. So we have to specify, or you're going to get an apple and an orange back, right? So.
Well, I forget which of the presenters, I think maybe Andy, you know, start with the end in mind. I mean, that's really what you're saying. Tell them why it's important, because, you know.
Yes, so to some degree, you got to meet the subs where they are. They may not be as versed in the technology that you want to use, and they're working with a lot of other GCs that wanted it a different way. One of the things we've talked about here this morning was, you know, filling that gap, or, you know, kind of providing them a buddy for the project. It's hand-holding in a less sugar-coated way, but helping them along to understand how to best give you that information, because you are going to do repeat business with them more than likely. And the more you can help, you know, enlighten them, the better the partner they're going to be. And I'll tell you, that comes back to the human element of all this stuff. Is technology is fantastic. I love tech, it's great. But without the people, the technology doesn't matter. And that's a hard lesson that I learn every day is, you know, there are days when people love certain tech, and there are other days when not so much. And they're all busy. They get frustrated, they've got deadlines, they've all got, you know, lives outside of their work. And when the technology doesn't make it easy for them to just get it done, or get it done to the time constraint that you have, that's where, you know, the human element can really intervene. So you have to find a way to make the technology work, but you got to find a way to make it work with your partner so that you're working together as a team. Because ultimately, they'll know what kind of partner you're going to be long-term. And if they understand that, and you can explain to them why that value is there, and you can explain to them, or not explain, but you can get them bought in on the concept of, hey, this helps us, you know, help you, but it also helps with things like pay apps. Like, you want to get paid early. Okay, get to work to this point. These are the things we really are tracking in our productivity things. These are your North Stars.
And to the extent probably that we can, as GCs, be consistent in what we ask, it helps make it easier and keep that kind of consistency in the interactions and the relationships, so that we're not asking for things one way one time and another way another time. But our approach is, like you mentioned with the estimator that we know, having that standard form. And it is a standard form, and so all of the subs that interact with them know that form is coming. If it hasn't come yet, they can even start filling it out before they've received it, because it's coming always.
Awesome. All right, well, let's take the second one from the top. What platform did you use to integrate your pre-con information into a dashboard? Can you do that in-house, or do you need a specialist? I guess that's to Greg.
For integrating our information, so for the three components that I mentioned just a few moments ago, we did have a specialist help to integrate that. You could, depending on the scale, you could probably do that with someone who learns Power BI pretty proficiently. And so that's within the capability of our pre-con department to have, as Andy mentioned, that maybe a couple estimators that really take leadership and ownership in that realm. But for what we've done, it's a little bit more sophisticated, I would say, beyond any typical pre-construction person, which has required us to lean on that internal resource that we have. And there's also, of course, external partners that can help supplement in that area as well.
Out of curiosity for the group, is a lot of companies using Power BI for visualizing data? Maybe a show of hands, is anybody in the audience using it? A few people. It is something you should look at if you are a Microsoft organization, which most of us are. There is a free version, and it enables you to point at data. And as the data changes every night or every hour, it can update and refresh. So maybe a takeaway from this would be to start to look at Power BI.
Stewart, you know, something to add to that too
Yeah.
is you could probably do a whole session just on helping everyone understand what a dashboard actually is versus what a metric is, or a KPI, or a card. I mean, there's this whole other language of how do you articulate the thing that you're going to get or that you want. A report versus a dashboard versus, like, it's kind of word soup right now, and a lot of it is missold by many software companies. I don't know if you guys see that, but like when you start talking about Power BI, people are like, oh, I just want a dashboard. Okay, but do you want a dashboard or do you want a report?
Yeah.
Or do you want a worksheet? That's a different thing too. And there's this word soup that hasn't been adopted just yet, and it's still kind of new. Whether it's Power BI or Domo or Tableau or any of these different BI tools, people don't necessarily understand what they're asking for sometimes, and how often do they want it, and what are the questions they want answers to. And ultimately, that to me has become the one thing that's the most challenging, is trying to pull out of people what do they want to know, and then making sure you have the data to back it up whenever you get to that point.
That's a great point, Andy. Okay, let's go to another one. Maybe this is to all of you. What's been the biggest hurdle in combining legacy historical cost systems with your new technology? How do you overcome them?
We have a lot of information in this is our particular case, and I suspect with many of you this will be similar. We have a lot of good and pretty well structured information in our accounting software, so that's a really good starting point. We also have a lot of information that's stored on files on the server, right? So I heard someone bring this up before, which is if you're going to be referencing projects which are the big ones, the iconic ones, the ones that people always talk about, you're probably going to have to get that one into this new platform one way or another. Whether that's just kind of importing the latest, greatest estimate, getting that final cost from the accounting system, and then supplementing that with the information that you absolutely have to have. I would say in kind of the ideal world, you kind of move toward a capture it as you go, and over time, those projects which are older and outside of that new system that are kind of the legacy information, those kind of fade to the background because they're much older and people will rely on them less. There'll be new projects that people care about. But I would say the exception being, one, starting up, you kind of have to get something to start up, so there's a little bit of a hump there initially. And then there's those key projects that are iconic or memorable, or we always refer to in our marketing materials and our presentations. We just have to have, kind of however that has to happen.
Anybody else want to add anything?
I think the key is it'd be nice if we had all the resources to dedicate to going back to the past and putting it in a form that works for us. But if anything else, if nothing else, you just got to start today. Start today with doing what you need to be doing with your key metrics, and like Greg says, over time, the rest of it becomes irrelevant.
Anything to add, Andy?
I agree. You got to start somewhere. So the sooner you dig in, the sooner you start having a base to build off of. And you can always go back and do some exploratory things, but I mean, what happened 5 years ago doesn't necessarily indicate what's going to happen tomorrow, so especially today.
The second one, how do you efficiently get cost information into unit format when GMP bids are typically organized by bid package? Jacob, you want to start?
I'll take that one. It lies in your system, setting it up that way from the beginning, that you speak all three languages. You have to speak master format, uniformat, and trade. And if you speak all three languages, and your estimating system does, and your WBS structure is set up that way, it's easy after that. But you got to set it up that way from day one. You can do it. Start today.
Anybody else?
So a free supporting plug, I mean, this is what the value of a DESTINI-like platform is you're able to create that translation between each different system very quickly, and you can switch screens really quickly and look at it. And then, the downstream effect of that is you're using it for different purposes at different states of the project. So how you estimate it, how you buy it out, how you track it, you're going to want to look at it all, in at least those three ways. We have more than that even, so you're always going to look at it for different reasons. So I think beginning with the end in mind, that's where you got to get going.
Our company standard is we report in all three languages on every estimate.
How do How do you handle that when it goes to the field? Obviously, you know, most of the accounting tools you hand it over in accounting code or, you know, a bid package. How do you track in the field and line that up with the three methods?
So I'll start with that. Whenever the job goes from pre-con to field, there's an enormous potential for data loss if it's not planned. So if it's planned though, that can be done in such a way that you retain a sufficient level of breakdown, and maybe that's not total breakdown down to the, you know, the nuts and bolts, but maybe that's sufficient breakdown for what you need it to be. And that just becomes an important standard that has to be met and maintained. So determining what a sufficient amount of breakdown is will kind of depend on, again, what you want to get out of it and how comfortable you are with maybe approximating for some of those more granular pieces. In some cases, it may be good to have, say, good enough for that final cost. Maybe total project breakdown and some sort of kind of mid-level granularity for how that breaks down in the end is sufficient for a precise, we know exactly, and then we can infer one level deeper perhaps and say that it's reasonable to infer that this is how that changed. So I'd say there is some degree of reasonableness and inference made, but you just have to figure out where do we want to say that this is kind of the threshold for some degree of certainty.
Awesome. Okay, I don't think any of you three has dedicated cost history staff, but I'm going to ask the question as written. What are the benefits of having a dedicated cost history staff? I know, Greg, you're involved in kind of getting it stood up, but do any of you have a response to what are the benefits?
I call that our accountants. Just kidding. How do we get that data conveniently into our hands is the question, and that is a good question. You're the best to answer that.
Sure. So for us, like Stewart mentioned, I am involved with a couple other people in kind of that initial hump, which is what we'll call like an implementation hump to get everything built and stood up and able to kind of coast back into a maintenance mode. I'll say there's need for that maintenance mode, and I think having dedicated staff, depending on the size of the company, can be very helpful. And the benefit of that, I'll say, is you have someone who's dedicated to those systems, understands how they work. Kind of think of any champion of any process of any software. It's a similar kind of thought, but the particular benefits will be when it comes to the knowledge of what kinds of jobs do we have, and maybe some of that context that isn't easily captured or obvious from the computer, from the information captured, that the person or the human will still be able to provide a lot of context that, we'll see. But I think that it's unlikely that we'll ever get to the point where you don't need some human to help digest and infer and provide some of that context.
What is the biggest reasons to switch from Excel to a platform like DESTINI? Andy, you already touched on one. Do you want to say it again?
Well, it comes back to data ultimately, but it comes back to having data standards and having project standards and templates. I mean, being able to organize information consistently from project to project, being able to create a standard process for your team to follow. Kind of tailgating on the last question there that we were going through is, it's not really having a full-time staff of historical cost analysts. It's having consistent process so that you can actually round trip the data at the end. If you can nail that part down, you don't need a full-time staff. And we have 2 people that kind of share in that role part-time. I would call it maybe 4 to 8 hours a week at best. And it's not every project. It's the projects that we cherry pick that we really want to look at. And we could do more, and in time I'm sure we will do more. But today it's like, what are the ones that you really care about? So to me, first of all, you just got to let go of Excel. I mean, Excel is a tool for working. It's a very narrow scope for analyzing data, working through things, working through process. I love Excel, I use it all the time. But it's not an estimating platform. And it doesn't allow you to version estimates. It doesn't allow you to analyze estimates. It doesn't allow you to break down all your different things. I mean, don't get me wrong. I know there are Excel whizzes in here that can do all kinds of amazing things, and you'll put me to shame in a heartbeat. But Excel is not a database. It's a file-based workflow. And no file-based workflow is going to allow you to support a team or analytics across your enterprise. It's not what it's built for. It's a great tool, but that's where a tool like, or a platform like DESTINI completely changes your approach. It allows you to integrate multiple other workflows and platforms together, so that now you're getting value from the data, not the file. And that's been one of the biggest things to deal with in transitioning teams.
Jacob or Greg, anything to add?
I think it's the manipulation of data that's the power and advantage. You know, when we talk about being able to speak in uniformat or master format or CSI or team trade, whatever, I mean, we can do that instantaneously, and that's a huge benefit. And how we report that data and the dashboards that we can build, it's just, it's harder to do it with the same speed and efficiency in Excel and without errors and formula errors and things that you should never have to deal with.
Yeah, I love Excel as well. That's my first language after English. But the drawbacks, which Andy spoke to, is you know, of course, Excel has pretty much it's a blank canvas of flexibility, which means that you know you can do exactly what you need for any particular project. The downside to that is that you can do something different for every project, and that some of those guardrails aren't in place. So you're not it's so much easier for something to break or to be inconsistent, so that when you go and, I mean, it is even possible to grab a stack of Excel files. It's a little clunky, but you can do it and analyze those. But still, just the potential for something different to have happened, some different process, something to get broken is so much higher. So I would say Excel has its definite uses, and I love Excel. But for the ability to aggregate and crunch information, having a platform, something like DESTINI Estimator, is really, really critical.
Thank you again for participating. Thanks for coming out. I know it's not easy traveling with all the COVID restrictions. Hopefully you have a wonderful 3 days. Look forward to sharing a coffee or a beer later in the conference with everybody. And with that, thanks again and have a wonderful rest of the week. See you, everyone.